And we are going to keep moving along. We're about halfway through our agenda today, and I'm excited and thrilled to speak to Paul Sonnier that's on the line. I see, Paul, you're there. Always good to see you. Always great to talk to you. Paul is an industry principal and for healthcare and life sciences with Frost Sullivan, and he is going to be moderating a session with Dudley around wearable tech and sensors in clinical trials. Paul, great to see you.
Thanks, Lisa. Great to see you again as well. And always exciting to be part of the HITLAB monthly symposium and being joined by Dudley, who looks like my separated twin at birth based on our pictures. So I am an industry principal at Frost & Sullivan, focused on healthcare and life sciences. And we support clients in their growth journey through syndicated market intelligence, research to support voice of the customer, market strategy, and brand and demand marketing solutions to support thought leadership and content marketing, as well as lead generation. And I'm pretty excited to have just finished my first report on the digital front door and patient experience solutions. So really interesting areas, as people are probably aware. I interviewed some fantastic companies that are leading in this space, including League, Castlight Health, Panda Health, and Change Healthcare. So if anyone's interested in learning about that area, please give me a buzz on LinkedIn or through email. So again, great to be here talking with Dudley Tabakin, who is the CEO at VivoSense. Dudley, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you're doing and helping your pharmaceutical clients, clinical trials, but really just give us a brief introduction and background on VivoSense first, if you don't mind, please.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and hello, everyone. And Paul and I did not coordinate our dress morning, but we do coordinate our haircuts.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. So yeah, Paul, thanks. Dudley Tabakin, I'm the CEO of VivoSense. VivoSense develops and validates digital clinical measures and provides end-to-end services and solutions for their delivery in clinical trials. So as you just heard there, I've listened to some conversations about healthcare through this morning, and we're pivoting a little bit to clinical trials, because at VivoSense, we believe you have to build up the evidence ahead of time in order that you can deploy digital outcomes or digital measures into clinical trials. So VivoSense were actually founded quite a while back in 2010. And we came out of the realization that there was technology being built, but little data cleaning and data analytics being performed on these data. And so therefore, outcome measures and findings were really quite difficult. You would have a whole lot of data to review, to look at, but really no insights into that data. So VivoSense was really developed to delve into those insights and to deliver those into clinical trials. Now, we take a very patient-centric focus. So when you're developing an outcome measure, a digital outcome measure, we take into account that this has to be meaningful to the patient. It's got to be important and relevant. And so it's a patient-first approach to using technology and in clinical trials, and to getting to the point where a pharmaceutical sponsor or clinical trial can actually use the evidence to make a decision or show efficacy or performance of their treatment.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And as probably people aren't aware, VivoSense has been around for quite a while, as Dudley mentioned, and I've known them since the early days when I worked with the Wireless Life Sciences Alliance in San Diego. So it's always great to circle back and connect with friends. So Dudley, could you dive a little deeper into how you're using wearable tech and sensors in clinical trials, and how you're pulling the data out of those devices?
Sure. So I think that I'll go back to the fact that there are quite a few wearable sensor technologies on the market at the moment, both in the FDA-approved medical device area, but then also on the consumer side of things. And both of them are very valuable in the data they collect. They collect so much data, and we need to make meaning from that data. So at VivoSense, we're actually sensor inclusive. We look at any sensor, and we're looking at the fit for purpose nature of that wearable technology. In a clinical trial, putting on a wrist-worn actigraphy device might be the approach you want to take. But if you're trying to measure heart rate accurately, you might want an ECG patch. Or we heard from Pierre Alexander earlier, you may need a respiration vest like the Hexaskin in order to measure respiration. So fit for purpose technology is what we focus on. And then from then on, we also focus on ensuring that we deliver an outcome measure that is, once again, meaningful to the patient and of interest to the study. So you may be able to measure steps from your wrist-worn actigraphy device, but that might not be a relevant measure for that clinical trial and might not provide you a relevant finding that can be used to determine the efficacy of the treatment.
Got it. And so, to that end, what are the digital endpoints? And maybe you could describe what those are, from a definition perspective, and what are the steps you take in order to validate digital endpoints for use in clinical trials?
So the validation of digital endpoints is just really important. I think that when you're trying to deploy a digital technology into a clinical trial, you need to take a very holistic validation approach. And the reason you need to do that is because the FDA, in order to approve your measurement, your endpoint, are going to need a whole lot of evidence. We follow what's called the V3 approach: verification of the sensor technology that you're going to use. Does it actually measure what it says it measures? Analytical validation is V2, the second V, and that's the validation of the analysis that's being done. So if you're counting steps per day, for example, and you're counting that steps per day in a Parkinson's population, are you accurately counting steps per day in a Parkinson's population versus a healthy population? That's the analytical validation piece. And finally, we come to the clinical validation, where we're going to understand whether we can measure something that's clinically relevant using this digital outcome measure. And then, so these are the outcome measures that we're talking about, and you need to validate them with this V3 approach in order that the FDA or any other regulatory authority are going to accept these as meaningful endpoints or clinical endpoints and primary and secondary endpoints in the clinical trials. So the other distinction, obviously, we make is when we look at an endpoint, a digital endpoint, we're talking about, can we measure a change from one state to another? Can we measure a change from baseline to post-treatment? Can we see that steps per day changes from baseline to post-treatment? And if they do, then we have a relevant endpoint that can be measured and can be used as a treatment effect for that study.
That's a pretty good segue, Dudley. So how do these digital outcome measures, how can they provide value to patients beyond the clinical trial?
Yeah, so I come back to the validation approach that we take here. When you go through this approach of validating a digital outcome measure so that we can say measure walking or stepping in Parkinson's disease, we can now use that measure more in the real world and in healthcare settings and post-market settings more effectively, because now we have built up the evidence that shows that there is clinically meaningful reasons to measure what we're measuring. The other important piece is part of the validation process. We need to understand that there must be meaningful aspects of health to the patient. Does the patient actually want to walk each day? Is that the most important thing to them, going for a walk? And it may be, but that is something that we need to understand on the front end, and that's part of the validation process. So, for example, most of us, well, not most of us, but certainly I am, I spend a lot of time behind the desk. I'm healthy, spend a lot of time behind my desk, and I'm obviously pretty sedentary for that reason. So if I were to measure activity and trying to understand how much moderate to vigorous activity I was doing each day, I might find that even when I'm not really feeling very well, my moderate to vigorous physical activity is pretty much the same as it is every other day because I spend so much time behind the desk. So this now becomes not really a meaningful measure to me because I'm going to see the same result. However, if I can measure something that's meaningful, for example, I do want to head out the door and take my dog for a walk every day. If I can measure whether I take my dog for a walk every day, we now have something meaningful that we measure for me as a patient. And now I have a reason to be engaged with the technology. And this comes through providing that validation, that meaningful aspects of health evidence in the early stages of this digital biomarker development that then can be used in post-market surveillance and healthcare into the future. So I think by doing that validation process, we're providing great opportunities for patients to really benefit from the technology.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating. It's beyond the clinical trial, so to speak, right?
Absolutely. And that's
so
where
wonderful.
we want to take it in the end, right? We want to get it into healthcare. It's just, there's a process, I think, to get there that we believe in.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm not sure if we're running out of time, Lisa. I see you popped up. So one last question for you, Dudley, if you don't mind. So curious who you partner with in clinical trials and how do you really enable decentralized clinical trials in general?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. I think I said in the beginning that we're sensor inclusive, and we absolutely are. We actually work with Hexoskin, Pierre Alexander. We work with other medical grade actigraphy devices and sensor patches. We also have worked with consumer devices like Apple Watches and Fitbits. So we really try and incorporate what's fit for purpose for the study. That's the one end. You've got to bring in the sensor technology. On the other end, we work with CROs and decentralized clinical trial organizations. And you might have heard of some of them, Medable, Science 37, some of the big ones recently. Working with them to deliver the outcome measures to the patients, to the clinical trial sponsors, because as we move to a more remote data capture process, we want to include objective measures from wearable sensors and wearable technologies into the clinical trials. The decentralized clinical trial companies allow for the patient registration and all that type of thing to be done at home, but we also want to include the objective measurements, and that's why we partner with them to bring that in to the system.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dudley. It's been really informative talking to you. And, I know we're both surfers, as people can see behind our, our desks. We've got the surfing pictures up. So maybe we'll get to go for a surf sometime.
I look forward to it, Paul. Thank you.
Thanks, Dudley. Lisa?
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Dudley. Appreciate that.